Hey, what is going on guys, Orvzet Stealth here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of underrated stuff for patch 9.5, so some underrated champions, build setups, and rune setups for patch 9.5. So first up here is going to be Morgana, and this is not Morgana support. Morgana support is very strong in this patch as well, but this is for Morgana mid lane. So Morgana mid lane, very underrated pick right now for this patch. She does very well into a lot of the meta AP champions being played right now, does a very good job at just neutralizing most lanes, doesn't really lose lane to a ton of champions, and she can just do a really good job at planting her W down, shoving out lanes, getting prio very easily in the laning phase. Her W now does more damage when the enemies are lower on HP as well, so this is a really good like execute type tool now in this patch. If you end up getting some good poke damage off on the enemy in the laning phase, then what you can do is you can just look to hit another bind, and then your W, it's going to do a lot of damage if they're low on HP, so it's just a lot easier for you to finish off targets now in this patch. Her ult change is also super nice. The movement speed that you now get from that, especially once you get rank 2 in it, it's 30% movement speed, so it just allows her to stick onto her opponents a lot better when she does hit her ults in team fights. So just overall very good pick in this patch, pretty easy to pick up as well. So if you're looking for a pretty simple mid lane champion to add to your champion pool for 9.5, I would definitely recommend Morgana. And then just remember, because you are playing Morgana mid lane, if you do play her in the mid lane, to max W out first. You don't want to be maxing Q out first on your Morgana mid lane, you want to max your W out first, so it does help you with your shove and your wave clear throughout the early to mid game. So next up here, let's take a look at Kael as well. Now, Kael in herself isn't really underrated for this patch. I would say the champion is pretty average for 9.5, but the build and the rune setup is what's underrated right now. So the rune setup that most like high elo Kael players are running right now is actually fleet footwork instead of the lethal tempo. You're still seeing most players run lethal tempo right now on Kael, but running the fleet footwork, also running the taste of blood and ravenous hunter allows for you to sustain a lot better in the early game. And as long as you can get past your early game on Kael, then you are going to be a pretty strong champion. So just getting that added sustain there from the runes is really good for her in this patch. Also going for corrupting potion there as your starting item to add even more sustain to your laning phase. And then for the build path on Kael, what's doing best right now across most elos is Nashers and then into a Gunblade as your second item. Most players right now are still either going for Rageblade second or Nashers second. Some people are still even rushing Rageblade on Kael. If you haven't tried out the Nashers into Gunblade on her, I would definitely recommend it. And then for the ability maxing on Kael as well, a lot of players are still maxing their E out first. However, Q max first is actually a little bit better than E first. Q cooldown does get reduced by quite a bit once you do max it out. It also does have a very high base damage, whereas E max, it doesn't really give you as much. The cooldown stays the exact same no matter how many points you put into it, so it's just a lot more worth it to max your Q out first right now on Kael. And then for NiKo in this patch, she's pretty much an S tier champion in every role besides the jungle. So if you're playing her mid and support, going for the AP build is what you want to do, and going for the Q max. And then if you are playing her on hit in the top lane or in the bot lane, then going for the W max and just building on hit items is what you want to do. If you guys do want to learn more about the NiKo pick and you didn't see my dedicated video to her, then I will leave an annotation up on screen here. And then for Yasuo in this patch, it's not really himself that's underrated, it's the rune setup right now for mid lane Yasuo. So mid Yasuo is doing much better with fleet footwork instead of Conquer now. With the Conquer changes and with the way it works for mid lane Yasuo, it's just not really worth it for him to take anymore, because especially in the laning phase, you're not really even gonna be able to get 5 stacks with Yasuo in the mid lane, because in your matchups in the mid lane, you're gonna be playing against ranged champions a lot of the time. You're not really gonna be able to stick onto them and get your 5 stacks and get usage out of those 5 stacks in the laning phase pretty much at all. So running the fleet footwork on him in the mid lane is just a better choice now for 9.5. For your top lane Yasuo, Conquer is still worth it, because in a lot of matchups you're going to be able to go for extended trades, get your Conquerors stacked up and get usage out of the 5 stack Conquer. So it's still good for the top lane, but not as good for the mid lane. So for Skarner in 9.5, really nice quality of life changes in this patch, and he's definitely a very underrated jungler now for 9.5. Running the Predator there on the Skarner is your best keystone choice for this patch. You can also do things like the Aftershock as well, but I just think running the Predator does give you a lot more gank potential in the early game. Skarner doesn't have the best ganks pre-6, so by running the Predator, it just allows you to get up in behind your opponent, land your crowd control, and it just makes his ganks a lot more effective. And then once you do reach the mid game, your ultimate is pretty much a free kill tool as long as you do have your flash up. So definitely if you get ahead with Skarner, be looking to be proactive on the champion, look to pop your Predator, look for flash out plays on high priority targets because you can really snowball game out of control if you can do that. For the build on Skarner, if you are snowballing really hard in the early game, you can go for a warrior instead of Cinderhulk, but generally speaking, going for Cinderhulk and then going for Trinity Force is going to give you a good mix of tankiness along with damage. You can go for something like you can just skip Trinity Force altogether, so you can go for something like a Cinderhulk and then into a Righteous Glory or Cinderhulk into Sterix, but I think that building Trinity Force, giving yourself a little bit of damage and a bit more carry potential with Skarner for solo queue is what is best for this patch. Then for a support pick here, Galio is someone that's been seeing a lot of play in the higher elos over the past few patches. It's also even seen some pro play recently, so it's a great pick into a lot of hard engaged melee supports. Now I wouldn't recommend blind picking this in solo queue because he does fare pretty poorly against range support picks, but if you can use him as a counter pick into things like the Alistar, Leona, Pyke, these supports that do just want to hard engage on your AD carry and the only thing they can really do is all in, those are the champions that Galio does great against. He's got instant peel with his W, can knock them up after that with his E, so he just does a great job at keeping his AD carry safe in the early game and throughout the game as well. The roaming potential of the Galio support is also really nice as well. Whenever you do hit level 6, be sure to just walk towards mid lane before you end up heading down to bot lane. Look for a play around the map with your ultimate, because if you can turn a play with your ultimate there by just paying attention to the map and helping out your mid laner in certain situations, then you're definitely going to be able to win a lot more games with this Galio support pick. And then a top lane pick here that's pretty underrated with Conquer is Hecarim. So Hecarim top lane with the Conquer, even though Conquer has been nerfed quite a bit recently, is still a pretty underrated rune on the champion. Now Hecarim can stack it up very quickly in the laning phase, and as long as he can get it to 5 stacks very fast, then he's going to be benefiting a ton from the bonus healing that you get from Conquer. The healing coming out of your W as well as the Conquer just gives Hecarim a ton of sustain, and it just allows him to do it really well in the early game. And then because you're playing Hecarim in the top lane, you're going to be getting a lot of solo XP, so it allows the champion to scale a lot better into the mid game there. It allows him to get Trinity Force a lot quicker. A lot of players also do go for Righteous Glory on Hecarim, and you just get a really nice mid game spike there with that setup. And then another top lane champion pretty underrated with Conquer is Akali. So Akali top lane is doing best with Conquer right now, also was doing pretty well with Conquer in last patch, and the champion did get some buffs in this patch as well. Mid lane Akali isn't performing as well, but top lane Akali is definitely performing pretty good so far in 9.5. You can stack Conquer up pretty quickly on the champion. Once you do get your Cutlass or once you finish your Gunblade, that gives you a stack of Conquer. You've also got your E and your Q, which gives you 2 instant stacks, so you can actually stack it up surprisingly quickly, and the extra healing you get from the Conquer along with your Gunblade just gives Akali a lot of sustain there in her 1v1 duels. And then lastly here, to round out the video, one more mid lane pick is going to be Thalia. So Thalia is a mid lane pick that's kind of been completely forgotten about, at least in solo queue. She's a pick that actually doesn't do all that bad, even though her early game is a little bit weaker than it was before. Her shove isn't as strong. She got changes back in 8.23, which reduced the cooldown of her Q in the early game, also reduced the cooldown of her passive of her worked ground, and Thalia's skirmish potential in the early game is actually really strong. Her Q being on a much shorter cooldown now gives her good 2v2 potential, so if you can like roam over, help your jungler with Scuttle Crabs in the early game, you're going to win a lot of those 2v2 duels with Thalia. She also does still have some of the best roaming potential in the game for any mid lane champion, and as long as you do run the dematerializer on Thalia, your shove isn't even all that bad. You're still going to be able to shove lanes pretty well once you do get a few levels on Thalia. It's really only the first couple of levels that she does struggle with compared to where she was before. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. Hopefully this does give you a little more insight on some things that are pretty underrated so far for patch 9.5. If you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.